Welcome to those of you joining us virtually through Zoom or on the phone. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy lives to be with us. We have worked to accommodate virtual participation and to provide meaningful interpretation tonight. For those just joining us virtually, if you are having any trouble, please reach out to info@communityengagement.org.
Before we begin today's virtual community engagement session, we'd like to take a few minutes to begin reviewing the webinar platform. First, a reminder that today's webinar is being recorded. All attendees are muted and in listen-only mode until the feedback portion of this session. During the second half of the session, we will open it up for feedback from individuals who have signed up to speak. We'll first hear from those who signed up to share verbal feedback, and then there will be an opportunity for others to share comments. We'll share specific instructions on how to give feedback using your device mic during that portion of the session. Next slide, please. A quick overview of Zoom controls. You can adjust your audio and mic settings in the lower left corner of the Zoom navigation bar. You'll use the raise hand function if we have time at the end of the session for additional public feedback. Click Show Captions to turn on English closed captioning, and you can select what language you want your audio in using the interpretation button. Next slide, please. There is an English and Spanish audio stream available for this session. To access the translated stream, you must listen via online audio in Zoom, not via the call-in number. Click the interpretation icon on the navigation bar in the lower part of the Zoom window to access your translation options. Select your preferred language, either English or Spanish. If you are listening in Spanish, it is recommended to mute original audio. This option is also located in the translation button. Next slide, please. And again, if you need technical assistance with the Zoom platform at any time during this meeting, please email us at info@pfascommunityengagement.org. Next slide. Before we begin, I wanted to highlight that by participating in today's online event, you acknowledge and consent that your name, video, image, or phone number may be visible to others in this live online meeting, as well as captured in the recording. Next slide. And I'll turn it over to our moderator.
Thanks, Grace. And thank all of you for joining us tonight. My name is Taylor Gillespie, and I'm the Acting Public Affairs Director in EPA's Region 8 office, based in Denver, and I'm the moderator for today's meeting. It's my job to help keep our session organized and moving along. Before we jump in, I want to share a little bit about myself. First, I have a corgi, and if you know anything about corgis, they love to bark. But I am hopeful that I have enough bones tonight to keep him quiet during tonight's call. But I say all of that because we are virtual tonight, and so we appreciate any patience if there are technical glitches or if life causes a disruption, and we're going to show you that same respect. We also have live interpretation tonight, and so I just want to emphasize that to have meaningful interpretation for those that are listening in Spanish, we have to speak a little bit slower and so that our interpreters can do that quality interpretation. So with that, I also want to give you just a little bit of background on my experience personally with PFAS. So my first experience with PFAS, it happened about a year after I started working at the EPA. I was helping write a press release about a state getting some funding for PFAS, and I was working really hard to try to impress my boss at the time. And so I spent hours researching and working on this news release. And one night I called my dad, and he asked me about work and what I was doing. And so I told him about this news release, and he asked me to read it to him. And I did. And then he told me he had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. And he said, you know, it wasn't that we needed more data or more facts to try to help people understand the issue. We needed a simpler explanation and to know how EPA was working to address the problem. And so I've tried to do that over the last several years, working on PFAS and on other complicated topics. And so my hope for tonight is that you all have a chance to give feedback to us so it can impact the work of scientists and leadership at EPA the same way that my dad helped me so many years ago. So here's the plan for tonight. And if you could go to the next slide. Right now I'm covering some housekeeping and introductions, but in a few minutes, you're going to hear from EPA's Region 8 Administrator, Casey Becker. And then after Casey, we're going to turn to EPA's PFAS counsel, Deborah Nagel. And then you're going to hear from Darcy O'Connor, who's going to share more about EPA's work under the PFAS Strategic Roadmap. While we are looking forward to sharing more about our work, we have left more than half of our time tonight to hear from you. I'll share more details about how you can participate in the listening session later on. And so with that, I'll turn it over to EPA's Regional Administrator for EPA Region 8, Casey Becker. Casey?
Thanks, Taylor. Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Casey Becker, and I'm the Region 8 Administrator for Regional Administrator, and EPA's Region 8 is Colorado, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, Wyoming, and 28 tribal nations. So before coming to EPA, I spent almost 8 years in the Colorado legislature, and during my time there, I worked on a number of PFAS-related bills, including one called the Firefighting Foams Control Act, which was a bipartisan bill that prohibited PFAS in firefighting home in Colorado, and another bill that provided funding to create a take-back program for PFAS while providing technical assistance to communities. So this is an issue that I'm familiar with. I've heard testimony from affected members of communities across Colorado, and I know how this issue is concerning and confusing for many of us. So as a mom with 2 young kids, as a former legislator, now as the regional administrator for EPA Region 8, I know it's important to hear from communities about their PFAS concerns. I care about making sure you're protected from PFAS, which is why we're here today. Hopefully you're aware that this is a listening session focused on a group of chemicals called PFAS. We're going to spend some time sharing what we are doing at EPA to address these chemicals, but most importantly, we want to hear from you. You'll hear from my colleagues about this in a few minutes, but by way of background, PFAS are widely used, long-lasting chemicals, often called forever chemicals, because they don't break down over time. There are thousands of different PFAS. Studies show that certain PFAS can have serious public health and environmental impacts, and we continue to learn more about the human health and environmental effects of these chemicals. I want to acknowledge at the outset that conversations like the one we're having today can be challenging, partly because the issues we're here to talk about can be complex, and also because many of you are likely here because PFAS have already impacted you, your family, or your community. We know that many of you have experienced PFAS contamination in your communities. Firefighting foam containing PFAS chemicals has impacted public water systems and private wells in several areas across Region 8. This has led to additional treatment, or in some instances, wells being removed from people's homes. EPA is working to address these chemicals using our PFAS strategic map. That's our plan to research, restrict, and remediate PFAS. By the end of September, EPA is awarding $236 million of bipartisan infrastructure law or bill funds to states and tribes for projects to address emerging contaminants like PFAS here in Region 8 states and on our tribal lands. Each state has a sampling effort underway to identify and prioritize areas of concern, and several states are implementing bans or collection programs to remove unused PFAS containing firefighting foams. This summer, the region will begin sampling wastewater at selected sites located on tribal reservations to identify the presence of PFAS there. And this multi-year study will provide both EPA and tribal communities with a better understanding of human health and ecosystem risks associated with PFAS. And then to support further research, the University of North Dakota was awarded $500,000 to develop practical strategies for removing PFAS from groundwater. So those are just some of the things happening in this region that are going to help us understand and address PFAS in the years to come. While we're working across EPA and with other federal agencies and states, it's important that we hear from you so we can ensure that the work we're doing is going to support you and your family. The feedback you provide today will help us better understand what you and your communities are experiencing in order to keep us focused on protecting human health and the environment and addressing PFAS contamination. And your feedback will help us better communicate about the risks of PFAS, including information about what PFAS are, how they're used, and how they can impact our health. The core group at EPA working on PFAS is known as the PFAS Council. So in a minute, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Deborah Nagel, who's a member of the PFAS Council, to share some opening thoughts with us. She and other EPA colleagues will talk more about the actions EPA has taken and plan to take, and we welcome your feedback on these actions or on additional actions you would like us to consider. So with that, I'll turn it over to Deborah Nagel.
Okay, thank you, Casey, and good evening, everybody. My name is Deborah Nagel, and my job at EPA is the director of EPA's Office of Science and Technology within the Office of Water. In this role, I oversee an office that is responsible for setting water quality criteria to protect human health and the environment, and setting technology-based standards to restrict the discharge of pollutants from industrial sources into our nation's waters. An additional responsibility I have in my job, and the reason I'm here tonight, is that I serve on the group that Casey mentioned, which is known as the PFAS, or the EPA's PFAS Council. As Casey mentioned, also a few minutes ago, addressing PFAS issues is a top priority for EPA and our Administrator, Michael Regan. And as you'll learn more in a moment, one of Administrator Regan's first actions when he joined the EPA in 2021 was to create EPA's PFAS Council. In creating the council, Administrator Regan asked us to develop an ambitious plan of action to advance science and research to restrict these dangerous chemicals from getting into the environment and to remediate the problem in communities across the country. The plan we developed is known as the PFAS Strategic Roadmap, our whole of agency approach to addressing PFAS. You'll hear more about the roadmap in a few minutes. The roadmap sets timelines by which EPA plans to take specific actions across each of our major program areas, not only the Office of Water, but in other areas as well. And in addition to these program-specific priority actions, we also include a set of actions that cut across our specific program areas. And one of these critical areas is engaging directly with communities. One of the key reasons we're holding this session today is due to the recommendations from EPA's National Environmental Justice Advisory Council that we engage with communities in each of our EPA regions. In my job in DC, I am committed and passionate about moving EPA's work forward on PFAS. But tonight, it's just as important that I join you all here in Region 8 so that I can have the opportunity to hear firsthand about your experiences with PFAS contamination. By listening to all of you, I can have a better sense of how to have the greatest impact through our work. So thank you all for being here today, and I look forward to hearing from many of you during our listening session tonight. I would like to turn it over to Region 8's Water Division Director, Darcy O'Connor, to spend some time walking through EPA's PFAS Strategic Roadmap and setting the stage for our listening session later. Darcy?
Thanks, Deborah. And hello, everyone. As Deborah said, my name is Darcy O'Connor, and I work in the EPA Region 8 office in Denver, and I am the director of the Water Division. The Water Division is responsible for direct implementation and oversight of state and tribal Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act programs throughout our region. And an additional responsibility of mine is to serve as a point of contact for Region 8 on PFAS issues and to work closely with the PFAS Council to ensure we're coordinating effectively on PFAS. Tonight, I'll share information about the work EPA has done under the PFAS Strategic Roadmap, highlighting actions we're planning for the future, and importantly, listen as you all share your experiences with PFAS to inform our work in Region 8 and across the country. Next slide, please. As Deborah shared earlier, in April of 2021, EPA Administrator Michael Regan established the EPA Council on PFAS and charged it to develop a bold, strategic, whole of EPA approach to protect public health and the environment from the impacts of PFAS. The council, comprised of senior technical and policy leaders from across EPA programs and regional offices, is co-chaired by EPA's Assistant Administrator for Water, Radhika Fox, and EPA's Regional Administrator for Region 1, David Cash. The council met Administrator Regan's call through the development of the PFAS Strategic Roadmap, which was released in October of 2021. The roadmap does several things. It includes clear timelines for concrete actions from 2021 through 2024. It fills a critical gap in federal leadership, setting a basic floor of federal protection across the country. It supports states' ongoing efforts to tackle PFAS by building critical science, methods, tools, and technology. And it builds on EPA's commitment to restore scientific integrity by making science the foundation of our work. I'll return to the specific commitments in our roadmap in a few minutes. Next slide, please. So before I get more into the roadmap, I wanted to spend a few minutes talking more generally about per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or what we refer to as PFAS, and why they're a concern. PFAS captures a large group of synthetic or human-made chemicals that consist of chains of carbon atoms surrounded by fluorine atoms. There are thousands of different PFAS with a variety of chemical structures. Some of these chemicals have been more widely used and studied than others. As an example, this slide shows the chemical structures of two of the most widely used and studied chemicals in the PFAS group, known as PFOA and PFOS. PFAS have been used in homes, businesses, and industries since the 1940s. And they have been and are used by many industries and found in many consumer products due to their useful properties, including stain and water resistance, and their beneficial role in firefighting foam. Due to their widespread use, PFAS have been found in soil, water, fish, and air across the country and around the world. Surveys conducted by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention show that most people in the U.S. have been exposed to PFAS, including measurable levels of certain PFAS in blood. Most known exposures to PFAS are relatively low, but some can be high, particularly when people are exposed to a concentrated source over a long period of time. PFAS are a concern to human health due to their known or suspected toxicity. Their health effects are better known for some PFAS, such as PFOA and PFOS, but much less well known for others. I'll describe a bit later some of the work EPA is doing to improve our scientific understanding of PFAS. Finally, scientific research has shown that PFAS can resist decomposition in the environment and in the human body due to their unique properties. Next slide, please. On this slide, we're looking at the life cycle diagram, and I realize that the text is very small, but I think the picture helps to illustrate a few major ways that PFAS can enter the environment and potentially impact human health. These include discharges of PFAS pollution from manufacturing facilities, discharges of PFAS containing firefighting foam, PFAS entering the wastewater treatment facilities from upstream sources, and PFAS applied to agricultural fields as a component of biosolids. Biosolids is a term we use for the solid organic matter that's left over from wastewater treatment process. Through these significant and diverse pathways, PFAS contamination presents unique challenges. Our approach towards PFAS takes this uniqueness into account and is centered around the following principles. First, we must consider the life cycle of PFAS, including their unique properties, the ubiquity of their uses, and the multiple pathways for exposure. Second, get upstream of the problem. EPA is bringing a deeper focus to preventing PFAS from entering the environment in the first place. This is a foundational step to reducing the exposure and potential risks of future PFAS contamination. Third, hold polluters accountable for their actions and for PFAS remediation efforts. Fourth, ensure science-based decision-making. EPA is investing in scientific research to fill gaps in understanding PFAS. And fifth, prioritize protection of disadvantaged communities. When taking action on PFAS, EPA is ensuring that disadvantaged communities have equitable access to solutions. And this principle of protecting communities is a critical reason on why we're here tonight. Next slide, please. The risks posed by PFAS demand that EPA attack the PFAS problem on multiple fronts at the same time. The actions described in our strategic roadmap each represent important and meaningful steps to safeguard communities from PFAS contamination. We believe that these actions will build upon one another to lead to more enduring and protective solutions. EPA's integrated approach to PFAS is focused on three goals. First, research. EPA is investing in research, development, and innovation to increase understanding of PFAS exposures and toxicities, human health and ecological effects, and actions we can take that incorporate the best available science. Second, restrict. EPA is pursuing a comprehensive approach to prevent PFAS from entering air, land, and water at levels that can adversely impact human health and the environment. And third, remediate. EPA is broadening and accelerating the cleanup of PFAS contamination. Next slide, please. In the PFAS roadmap, EPA committed to issuing a public report on its PFAS progress each year. In November of last year, EPA released its first one-year progress report, summarizing the critical actions we've taken since the roadmap's release in 2021. On this slide, we have some of the highlights of actions we've taken, and I will go into greater detail in these later in the presentation. We propose to designate 2 PFAS as hazardous substance under CERCLA or Superfund. We've released drinking water health advisories for 4 PFAS. We've laid the foundation for enhancing data on PFAS. We've begun distributing $10 billion in funding to address emerging contaminants under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. We've expanded the scientific understanding of PFAS and translated the science into EPA's efforts. We've proactively used enforcement tools to better identify and address PFAS releases. We've released a set of PFAS analytical tools to publicly share data on PFAS in communities. And finally, we've engaged with federal partners and the public. EPA's PFAS work was informed by public webinars, stakeholder meetings, congressional testimony, and engagement with EPA's federal advisory committees. EPA is coordinating with its federal partners in the Biden-Harris administration to harness the collective knowledge, experience, and capacity of the federal government to address PFAS. In addition to highlighting the actions we've taken, our one-year progress report also identifies a series of upcoming priority actions for 2023, including proposing a national drinking water standard, taking final action on the proposed CERCLA designation, continuing to improve chemical data and safety, restricting upstream PFAS discharges to waterways, addressing PFAS in biosolids, and engaging with communities like we're doing here tonight. I'll be covering each of these upcoming actions in a few moments. Next slide, please. Over the next few slides, I'll cover some program-specific commitments from various offices here at EPA. As I highlighted earlier, science and research are the foundation of EPA's work on PFAS. EPA is working to improve scientific understanding of PFAS in 3 primary areas. First, we're working to develop and validate methods to detect and measure PFAS in the environment. Second, we're working to advance the science to assess human health and environmental risks from PFAS. Our scientists are developing human health toxicity assessments for additional PFAS compounds, compiling and summarizing available and relevant scientific information, identifying PFAS sources, the way PFAS move in the environment, and the pathways by which people can be exposed to PFAS, and characterizing how PFAS exposure may contribute to cumulative impacts on communities. Third, we are working to evaluate and develop technologies for reducing PFAS in the environment. And this work will help inform decisions on drinking water and wastewater treatment, contaminated site cleanup and remediation, air emission controls, and end-of-life material management. Next slide, please. The next area I'll cover is our work to ensure chemical safety. EPA's Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention is working on many actions to restrict PFAS, and most of these actions fall under two laws: the Toxic Substance Control Act, Toxic Substance Control Act, or TSCA, and the Toxics Released Inventory Program, or TRI. First of all, EPA is working to deepen our understanding of PFAS categories through the National PFAS Testing Strategy, which we released in October of 2021. The testing strategy is a major step towards the game-changing goal of breaking PFAS into distinct categories to direct research, amplify regulatory action, and accelerate technology and policy solutions to restrict and remediate PFAS. Second, EPA is working under its TSCA authorities to strengthen EPA oversight over both new and existing PFAS. EPA is working to ensure a robust review process for new PFAS to ensure that chemicals are safe before they enter commerce. And we're working to review existing PFAS under TSCA to ensure that they're being used in ways that do not present concerns and to prevent resumed production of legacy PFAS or their use in new ways. For example, in late January, EPA proposed a rule that would ensure that any discontinued use of certain PFAS cannot re-enter the marketplace without EPA review. Third, EPA is collecting data and improving reporting on how PFAS are used and released. Under TSCA, we're working on a final rule to better characterize the sources and quantities of manufactured PFAS in the U.S. This final rule would collect significant new information on chemical quantities, byproducts, worker exposures, and disposal methods. And under TRI, we're working to enhance PFAS reporting by proposing a rule to remove exemptions and exclusions from reporting. Last December, EPA released a proposed rule to enhance TRI PFAS reporting, and if finalized, this rule will enhance the data available to the public so EPA and other federal, state, and local agencies can use this data to help best protect health and the environment. Fourth, EPA is working to reduce the presence of PFAS in products purchased by the federal government. In December of 2021, President Biden signed an executive order that reestablishes the federal government as a leader in sustainability. A critical element of the executive order is to promote sustainable federal purchasing, which includes prioritizing the purchase of products without added PFAS, and EPA is taking a leadership role in this work. Next slide, please. Next, we'll cover our Office of Water, where we're taking an extensive set of actions to restrict PFAS through EPA's programs to protect drinking water and our lakes, rivers, and streams. First, let's look at drinking water. Responding to a growing body of science, EPA will soon release a proposed rule to set enforceable limits in drinking water for specific PFAS under the Safe Drinking Water Act. EPA's proposed rule has cleared interagency review, and the agency intends to issue a proposed rule for the public comment soon. EPA is also working to improve drinking water data through monitoring, toxicity assessment, and health advisories. EPA is currently taking important steps to monitor drinking water in communities across the country through our 5th Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule. This program is testing for 29 PFAS chemicals from 2023 through 2025 in thousands of drinking water systems nationwide. You may remember that an earlier round of EPA monitoring from 2013 through 15 helped us discover PFAS contamination and led to significant state and local actions to safeguard our drinking water. With our latest rule, we're taking it a step further. We'll be testing for nearly 5 times more PFAS chemicals at significantly more water systems. Here in Region 8, testing will occur at more than double the number of systems, and we'll be using methods that can detect PFAS at much lower levels. This data will be critical in improving our understanding of how communities, including low-income communities and communities of color, may be exposed to PFAS in their drinking water. As I mentioned earlier, in June of 2022, EPA released 4 health advisories: interim health advisories for PFOA and PFOS, and final health advisories for PFBS and for Gen X chemicals. Under the Clean Water Act, EPA is working to develop national technology-based discharge limits for industries that use PFAS through our Effluent Limitation Guidelines program. In January of this year, we released our final Effluent Limitation Guidelines Plan 15, which outlines key steps towards addressing PFAS discharges across a range of industrial categories. Also under the Clean Water Act, we're working to address PFAS in permitting and through analytical methods, water quality criteria, and fish advisories. We're working to leverage the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES, wastewater permitting program to improve monitoring and to reduce PFAS discharges to waterways. In December of last year, EPA released new guidance to states describing how to leverage permits and pretreatment programs to increase monitoring, including at known or suspected discharges of PFAS. This guidance will enable states to take appropriate steps to restrict PFAS at their source, collect important data on PFAS discharges, and enable communities to work closely with their state permitting authorities to take action where discharges may occur. We're also working on improved analytical methods to measure more PFAS in more places. In April of 2022, EPA released draft aquatic life water quality criteria for public comment for PFOA and PFOS. These reflect the latest peer-reviewed scientific knowledge regarding the effects of these chemicals on freshwater aquatic organisms. We're also working to enhance data availability on PFAS in fish tissue to help states and tribes to set PFAS fish advisories. And finally, as I referenced earlier, we're working to evaluate the risks of PFAS in biosolids. We will be finalizing a risk assessment for PFOA and PFOS that will serve as the basis for determining whether regulation of these chemicals in biosolids is appropriate. Next slide, please. This slide covers 2 of our program offices. Our Office of Land and Emergency Management, which houses EPA's cleanup programs, and our Office of Air and Radiation, where our team of experts work to address air pollution. First, we'll talk about a specific action that I highlighted earlier under CERCLA, which stands for the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act, also known as Superfund. In September of 2022, EPA published a proposed rule to designate PFOA and PFOS as hazardous substance. If finalized, this rule would require facilities across the country to report PFOA and PFOS releases that meet or exceed the reportable quantity for these substances, enhance the ability of federal, tribal nations, state, and local authorities to obtain information regarding the location and extent of releases, and enhance the ability of EPA and other agencies to respond to releases or threats of releases of PFOA and PFOS, and help establish national consistency in the evaluation and cleanup of these chemicals and encourage better waste management practices. As identified in the roadmap, EPA intends to take final action on the proposed rule in 2023 and will continue to work closely with stakeholders to better understand equity concerns. As an additional step, EPA anticipates issuing an advance notice of proposed rulemaking in the coming months to seek public comment on designating other PFAS chemicals as CERCLA hazardous substances. Next, under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA, EPA plans to propose 2 regulations this year. First, EPA plans to develop a proposed rule to add specific PFAS to the list of hazardous constituents, which would mean that PFAS are subject to RCRA corrective action requirements. Second, EPA plans to clarify that emerging contaminants such as PFAS can be cleaned up through the RCRA corrective action process. The third item on the slide highlights EPA's commitment to take significant steps towards updating our research and guidance on PFAS destruction and disposal. EPA published interim guidance in December 2020, and in that document, we highlighted significant uncertainties about the effectiveness of some PFAS destruction and disposal technologies. We have a deadline to update the guidance by December 2023. Finally, our Office of Air and Radiation is also taking steps towards restricting PFAS by building the technical foundation for potential Clean Air Act regulation. We're working to identify sources, to develop monitoring approaches and information on mitigation technologies, and to increase our understanding of the fate and transport of PFAS air emissions. This work will support future decisions on whether to designate PFAS as hazardous air pollutants under the Clean Air Act. Next slide, please. No conversation about PFAS is complete without highlighting the transformational investments being made in America's water infrastructure through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or bill, which was signed by President Biden in November of 2021. The bill provides the single largest investment in clean water that the federal government has ever made. The bill builds on research, restriction, and remediation called for in the PFAS Roadmap by providing $10 billion for communities impacted by PFAS and other emerging contaminants. The bill builds on 3 of EPA's existing water finance programs and focuses them specifically on PFAS and emerging contaminants. And it provides all $10 billion of these funds without a requirement for state matching funds, and all funds are provided either as grants or principal forgiveness loans. Of the $10 billion, $4 billion will flow through the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, $1 billion through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, and $5 billion will provide grants to address emerging contaminants in small and disadvantaged communities. In February of this year, EPA announced the availability of $2 billion from this program to address emerging contaminants, including PFAS in drinking water across the country. These funds will be allocated to states and territories and will promote access to safe and clean water in small, rural, disadvantaged communities while supporting local economies. EPA is committed to maximizing the impacts of these funds in addressing urgent water challenges facing communities. And we're thrilled that these funds will enable communities to invest in PFAS treatment solutions while EPA continues to take action to research, restrict, and remediate PFAS consistent with our PFAS Strategic Roadmap. I've covered a lot of information in this presentation tonight, and I would encourage you all to visit our website, epa.gov/PFAS, which is PFAS, where you can find all of this information and much more on the actions EPA has taken and plans to take with regards to PFAS. The website is regularly updated and will have the latest information related to new rulemakings and other actions. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to our moderator, Taylor, to talk more about the next part and the most important part of our session, where we'll hear directly from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Darcy. So I want to, in a few moments, we're going to hear from you. But before that, I just want to make sure you understand how your comments are going to be used at EPA and what actions you may want to be aware of so you can continue to comment on PFAS-related activity. The information that you share with us tonight is going to help inform future actions that EPA takes towards helping communities address PFAS contamination. We do not plan to respond individually to the comments that we receive. However, it is important to note that if you have specific feedback for EPA on a proposed rule or action related to the PFAS Strategic Roadmap, you should comment on that particular action through the formal comment process, which is available in the Federal Register. We are planning to take back everything that we hear tonight and at the other regional listening sessions so we can use that information to inform EPA's future work on PFAS. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Grace at LRG. She's going to share some additional details about how our listening session is going to work. Grace?
Great. Next slide, please. All right. So we will now open this session up for public feedback. First, we'll hear from individuals who signed up during the registration process. Before we get to those folks, a couple of tips for how to share verbal feedback. You signed up ahead of time, you should have already received a message in Zoom with a link or a message that you need to click on. That will give you speaker permission. Please click on that link. When you have permission to speak as a panelist, we'll call your name. At that point, you should unmute and begin speaking. You're welcome to turn on your video or keep it off, up to you. And please limit your comments to 3 minutes. So back to you, Taylor and team, and we'll get started.
Great. Thanks, Grace. So it's going to take us just a minute or so here to get that first person unmuted. So I know there may be a little bit of an awkward silence, but give us just a minute or so, and then we'll call on that first person that's registered to speak. We have a couple folks that had signed up that I think are declining. So give us just another minute. We're going to keep going through this list here and see if we can find someone that would like to give us some comments. All right, I think we have someone here. It is Madhavi Chatur. If you're ready, you can unmute. Madhavi, if you are there, there should be a prompt that's oh, there you are. Great.
Yes, hi. Okay, 1 second.
Madhavi, do you need to unmute? Not sure if we could hear you.
Yes, 1 second. I need just 1 second. Okay, hi. So I am Madhvi Chatur, 11-year-old climate warrior from Colorado, and thank you for listening to my testimony. I came to know about PFAS when I was 6 years old when DuPont reached a settlement of $670 million for PFAS. Then I learned about them with the help of my mom and also spoke with many scientists about it. I held meetings with CDPHE, which is the Colorado Department of Public Health, about the PFAS problem. I also raised awareness about it in 2019, 2020, and 2021 in many public speeches. My awareness campaign about PFAS has reached millions. I created videos about PFAS effluent release in the city of Denver's Sandy Creek for COP26. I also worked with Governor of Colorado to declare March as PFAS Pollution Impact Awareness Month since 2022. Last year, I held a huge PFAS pollution impact awareness seminar with Dr. Philippe Grandjean from Harvard Chan School of Public Health. Around 300 people from different countries participated. This month too, I am holding an awareness seminar on March 23rd. Then parallelly, after my work with the plastic bill in Colorado on the ban of plastic bags and styrofoam containers, I spoke to the then state rep and now Senator Ms. Lisa Cutter in July 22nd, 2021 to bring a bill to ban PFAS chemicals in consumer products. After many testimonies and amendments, the ban of PFAS in consumer products is now a law in Colorado, but still there is more to do. I had the honor of meeting with the EPA waterhead, Ms. Radhika Fox, last November. So can the EPA please make the effluent release discharge limits as close to zero as possible? Are these EPA guidelines like legally binding? And can you please explain how you would hold the polluters accountable? How is EPA going to handle the bioaccumulation in our food? Thank you.
Thanks, Mojave. We appreciate those comments. You're going to have another speaker up next. Just give us just a second to unmute that person as well. All right, I think we have Mari Edgars. Right? Mari, if you're there.
Yes, I'm here.
Great.
I have my video off, but I'm not seeing it. But anyway, thank you for the opportunity to comment. First, I'm delighted to learn about all the actions that EPA is taking to address PFAS. I hope that there will be funding for communities to test not only their public drinking water supplies, but also private home well water. And that there's also funding for families, rural families on wells, not just for public water supplies. I work a lot in a tribal community, and in this community and in others that I'm aware of, it may be the nonprofits in the community who are better positioned to research PFAS issues in water when the tribal government doesn't have the capacity to do so. So I hope that where there's funding available for tribes, that nonprofits and tribal colleges will be eligible to apply for the funds and not just tribal governments. I'm glad to see that the MCLs are going to be issued soon, and I hope that they are as close to the health advisories as they possibly can be, and not magnitudes higher. And finally, one thing I didn't hear about, and I may have missed it in all these presentations, but what's the potential for actually reducing the use of PFAS chemicals in manufacturing, as opposed to just monitoring releases and cleaning up the environment and understanding the human health impacts? What can we do to actually reduce their use in our economy? I would like to know more about that. And thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to comment. That's it.
Thanks, Mari. We have Ashley House. Ashley?
Hi, yes, thank you to the panel. Hopefully you can hear me. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm Ashley House. I'm the Director of Public Policy for Federal Affairs for the Colorado Farm Bureau. At Colorado Farm Bureau, we represent approximately 20,000 members, farming and ranching families across the state, and just wanted to take the opportunity to remind the panel that often as farmers and ranchers, we're passive receivers of PFAS. So I think it's important to note that. And as mitigation efforts move forward, It's important that farmers are not held responsible for the presence of PFAS chemicals, which we did not produce nor intentionally use. I'd also like to draw the panel's attention to the current climate, economic climate, is presenting a time where inflation is at an all-time high. Supply chain disruptions and the high cost of supplies are already escalating food prices. So the onus of PFAS remediation is additionally compounding for farmers and ranchers at a difficult time. It's important that our elected leaders, government officials, and agency folks remember that, please. I'd like to address the service provided by some of our farmers by taking biosolids from water utilities for use as fertilizer. This is only done through a legal and permitted process. So unfortunately, some of those biosolids do contain PFAS, but it's important to remember that that permitted process is something that our farmers and ranchers here in Colorado maintain diligence abiding by. And finally, I'd like to conclude by saying that the health and safety of America's families are important to all of us, and that's certainly a priority of our membership, and we look forward to being a resource for EPA as they continue their work on the roadmap. Thank you so much for the time.
Thanks, Ashley. We have Liz Rosenbaum. Liz?
Hi, thank you for being on Zoom tonight. I hope you can hear me okay. I have been a community organizer since 2016 when the Fountain Valley area found out they were poisoned with PFAS chemicals, and we were poisoned intentionally for profit by the chemical companies. So I have been following along in the community updated with 4 major municipalities, and now it comes down to my small HOA, which I was able to break the news to them kindly, gently, and bring in the water district manager. So please make sure you have resources for small areas like mine, who don't have someone like me who have been tracking this for 7 years. Where there's 2 HOAs where I live. Mine is only 106 houses. The other one is about 300. So there's about 425 water taps in our water district. We cannot afford $1 million anything for filtering chemicals that we did not put there. We're also very rural and have livestock. So when I was talking with my HOA community, Villa Casita, on Sunday evening, there's a big concern about their chickens, ducks, food that we then consume containing PFAS because it bioaccumulates in bodies, including our small homestead pets that we have. So it's incredibly important to provide resources for smaller communities to fill out grants. It is daunting to fill out a federal grant, and so many times grant programs are available and small communities or indigenous communities are left out. We literally need someone available to help fill out line 1 through line last to get these grants processed. So please provide resources for that. The state of Colorado has provided a resource for my water district manager, Kevin, to help him fill out the grant for state resources. And we're going to apply for emergency funding, which wasn't available until, I'm a community activist, and I wish I would have known when it was available. So if there's phone numbers out there of people that you have who are community organizers, please personally call them and say, hey, there's grant money available. Let us help you do this. Don't assume everybody knows that this is available to them. I'm an organizer, and even then, I have a regular job, and this is the strangest thing that I've ever done in my life. And I didn't think I'd be on year 7 talking about PFAS, and I know a lot of you haven't either. So please take the charge. You all do this as a full-time job. I don't, and help us out. Thank you so much for lowering MCLs, but please provide additional resources for small communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. We have Sonia Lunder. Sonia?
Hello, my name is Sonia Lunder. I am the Senior Toxics Policy Advisor at the Sierra Club nationally. I live in Colorado, and I want to thank you for holding this listening session. I note that while there hasn't been any PFAS detected in my home drinking water, there's undoubtedly the chemicals found in my blood, my body, the food I eat, and the air I breathe. EPA launched its action plan in February 2020 with a pledge of a full court press to bring these toxic chemicals into regulation. But it's really distressing 2 years later to see really slow progress to address the ongoing uses of PFAS in products, emissions into the environment, and the cleanup of contaminated sites. We know the agency has missed many self-imposed deadlines, including adding PFAS to the toxics release inventory, which I note is kind of the lowest tier of intervention because it's an information gathering step and doesn't have any impact on regulatory decision making or any leads to any restriction from industry. We're waiting for the agency to set drinking water standards for the entire class of PFAS. We hear that there will be draft drinking water limits for 2 chemicals out of the thousands that are in commerce. And in terms of discharging PFAS into the rivers, EPA last fall instructed states that it would probably be faster for them to take action on their own rather than to await the EPA taking sector-wide action on discharging industries. EPA hasn't actually listed the chemicals and require a Superfund that would guide disposal and restrict unsafe disposal, making it legal for chemical waste to be dumped into landfills, burned in incinerators, or spread in public parks or farmlands when they're in biosolids. These disposal techniques are not safe ways to contain such toxic and long-lived compounds. In the meantime, we see evidence that PFAS is growing in farms, soils, food that we're producing. It's widespread in rivers, fish, and wild game meat that could pose a health problem for people on the planet. And there's painfully little conversation about the safety of eating wild-caught fish for tribal communities or other people who are fishing in our region. EPA inaction has forced states to move more quickly to protect their people, their food, their water, and their land. But these state-led efforts aren't really reaching places in the region outside of Colorado. And we know Colorado has devoted a lot of energy and staffing and funding to PFAS issues. And thank you, Administrator Becker, for leading on that. But we need these actions to be equitable, and we can't depend on motivated and focused states to take action in light of the delay in federal responses. And so, of course, I don't blame this on CALA staff or a lack of institutional commitment. This flurry of papers on PFAS and press releases and announcements is exciting for someone who's been aware of these compounds for 20 years. But we see the agencies hampered by a lack of funding, really cumbersome regulatory requirements, and delays that are enacted by other federal players like the military, OMB review, all kinds of challenges. So I think in summary, I'd say my most pressing request is a little bit more honesty and transparency about the slow pace of the solutions that we're desperately needing. It would actually be reassuring to say or to hear, it's still completely legal to put PFAS into the air, to dump them into wastewater drains, to find them leaching out of landfills, or to have PFAS measured in foods that are grown on cropland where biosolids have been spread. We don't know the identities of all the PFAS compounds. We don't know how they're used. We don't know as much as we need to about how they're spreading in the environment. At the pace we're moving, it will take years or decades before we're able to regulate these, especially the newer generation PFAS compounds. I think that kind of transparency and clarity would be helpful in spurring states, lawmakers in states and in Congress, and the general public into action. Thank you very much.
Good to see you, Sonia.
Thanks, Sonia. We have Jennifer Peters. Jennifer?
Yeah, hi, good evening. Thank you. My name is Jennifer Peters, and I'm the Water Programs Director at Clean Water Action. I'm also a resident of Colorado, and I'm very concerned about the PFAS compounds that have been found in my family's drinking water. My drinking water provider is the city of Englewood, which has levels of PFOA and PFOS that exceed EPA's interim 2022 health advisory levels. When we learned about the PFAS in our water, we installed an under the sink reverse osmosis filter system. We are fortunate that we could afford such a costly treatment system, but not all households in my community have the same luxury. Yet I think we can all agree that everyone deserves access to safe drinking water, not just those of us who can afford it. I'm aware that EPA will soon be proposing drinking water regulations for 2 PFAS, which are long overdue and just one action of many that EPA must take to address these chemicals. While I strongly support EPA regulating PFAS in drinking water, I'm also concerned about the financial burden these regulations might have on drinking water systems and their customers. Drinking water system plants funded by the customers of regulated public water systems who run them should not be the place where we solve our water pollution challenges. We should not be shifting the burden of contamination caused by industries benefiting from the use of PFAS chemicals onto downstream communities. Allowing PFAS to contaminate our drinking water sources in the first place is a remarkable injustice and glaring inefficiency. So in addition to setting drinking water limits for PFAS, I urge EPA to move quickly to require technology-based effluent limits for all industries known to use these chemicals as required by the Clean Water Act. I'd also like EPA to work with states to ensure they are implementing the agency's December 2022 guidance on addressing PFAS discharges using Clean Water Act, NIPDES permits, and industrial pre-treatment programs. States like Colorado and Michigan have become leaders in using their existing Clean Water Act authorities to begin addressing PFAS in surface waters, and I urge EPA to push all states to follow their lead. By moving quickly to set ELGs for industries that use PFAS, and by requiring states to robustly use the tools of the Clean Water Act to address these chemicals, EPA can begin to shift the burden away from drinking water systems and communities to clean up PFAS and back onto the polluters who financially benefit from using these toxic chemicals in the first place. I want to thank EPA for holding this listening session, and I appreciate the opportunity to provide comments this evening.
Thanks, Jennifer. We have Caitlin Miller. Caitlin?
Yes, hi, everybody. Good evening. I'm Caitlin Miller, Senior Associate Attorney with Earth Justice based out of Denver. EPA must take strong action on PFAS to support and urge states to utilize the full extent of their regulatory authority under the Clean Water Act and state law to limit PFAS discharges as much as possible. Colorado has a significant number of PFAS handling sites, including the Suncor Oil Refinery in Commerce City. This facility discharges into Sand Creek and the South Platte River, and the South Platte River is a critical drinking water source for downstream municipalities. A study of Suncor's own monitoring data from 2021 found that this facility discharges just from one of its many outfalls accounted for 16 to 47% of the total PFAS found in Sand Creek and 3 to 18% of the total PFAS found in the South Platte River. Although Suncor has since installed a temporary treatment system, it still discharges huge amounts of PFAS that are orders of magnitude above EPA's interim health advisory levels. For instance, in November of 2022, the facility discharged 1,100 parts per trillion of PFOS and 54 parts per trillion of PFOA. These amounts are 55,000 times and 13,500 times the interim health advisory levels for PFOS and PFOA, respectively. The Colorado Water Quality Control Division is renewing Suncor's discharge permit, which will include effluent limits and other requirements for the facility's PFAS discharges. This permit will be the first in the state to include PFAS effluent limits. So it's incredibly important that the division set really strong limits in this precedent-setting permit. But the draft permit that the division released last year fails to include necessary limits to protect downstream communities. For instance, the division doesn't propose to set a technology-based limit for Suncor's PFAS discharges, despite the fact that it's a minimum requirement of the Clean Water Act and state law. It also proposes water quality base limits that are based on EPA's now outdated 2016 health advisory levels that are significantly higher than the interim levels. I raise Suncor and the division's draft permit here as a case study in why we need strong guidance from EPA. Without strong federal actions, states like Colorado may be reluctant to take the steps necessary to stop further PFAS pollution. There are multiple actions EPA can take under its strategic roadmap to address this problem. First, the agency should move away from an inefficient and ineffective chemical by chemical risk-based approach and embrace a technical feasibility approach for PFAS as an entire class. Second, EPA must issue its final health advisory levels for PFOS and PFOA and issue its MCLs, as soon as possible. The agency's delay on this action is keeping states, including Colorado, from setting strong PFAS standards in the meantime. Third, EPA must issue revised effluent limitation guidelines for PFAS from petroleum refineries. As shown by the Suncor example, these facilities can be major sources of toxic PFAS pollution. And finally, EPA must urge states like Colorado to issue the most stringent PFAS limits and standards possible to proactively prevent future pollution. Thank you all for the opportunity to give comment today, and I look forward to future opportunities to engage with EPA on this topic.
Thank you, Caitlin. We have Susan Noble. Susan?
Yes, hello. My name is Susan Noble, and I am a Commerce City Council member and a council representative to a joint city special district water commission. I am, however, speaking as an individual tonight, and I would like to wholeheartedly endorse the last speaker. I want to thank EPA Region 8 for this informative session and all that you have done to date, and for the opportunity to tell more of our story. I also want to thank our independent special South Adams County Water Sanitation District for its commitment to safe water for the community. In 2018, it proactively contacted government agencies when it detected over 2,100 parts per billion in our drinking water of PFAS and shut down 2 contaminated drinking water wells immediately. The likely source of the contaminated groundwater is a former chemical plant that was located in a neighboring city. Since making the discovery, South Adams County Water and Sanitation District voluntarily reduced the level of PFAS far below the current 70 parts per billion level to non-detectable. To do so, costly filters and dilution with Denver water were required. The Denver water agreement can't last forever. Commerce City has carried more than its weight in Colorado heavy industry, but that role has come at a high cost. South Adams County Water and Sanitation Commission is seeking federal grants to construct a new water facility dedicated to the latest effective systems for clearing water of PFAS, which I also wholeheartedly support. Our city recently sent a letter of support for a multi-million-dollar federal grant that South Adams County Water and Sanitation District did not win. As a designated disproportionately impacted community, our residents, who are the bulk of South Adams County Water and Sanitation District's customers, are not in a financial position to cover the monthly bills, nor are they responsible for the PFAS contamination. In addition to preventing PFAS contamination and penalizing violations, I respectively urge you to also prioritize historic PFAS contamination in communities essential to industry such as ours. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Casey.
We have Bonnie Ryder. Bonnie?
Good evening, and I thank you for this opportunity to speak with you tonight. I noticed in the beginnings of this presentation that it was stated that this will not be taken as a comment or put on the record. I'm still hopeful that this will do some good. I am the chair of the Lowry Landfill Superfund Site Citizens Advisory Committee, and we have a site that not only is upstream from thousands of private wells, but is also above 4 major aquifers that serve the Front Range of Colorado from Pueblo to Wyoming border. And there's still 138 million gallons of chemical waste left in this Superfund site. And I was kind of excited about CERCLA coming up with some rules by which we could regulate the site. Our Citizens Advisory Group has been asking EPA Region 8 for over 4 years to set up a committee with our cooperation and the cities and the state and EPA and commissioners to discuss technologies that could start cleaning the chemicals out of this Superfund site, because we're very concerned about the further contamination of our aquifers underneath our homes. Many of us are on well water, so we would like to see these chemicals cleaned out. However, from corporate capture of waste management has fought this and will not allow EPA to even consider a technology group to look at what could clean these waste pits out. And now we're further concerned because we found evidence that there's PFAS at the Lowry Landfill Superfund site. It's in another section, but it's the same waste that are in the Superfund site. As I said earlier, 138 million gallons of chemical waste remain there. And now we find out that a waste management operation at the site, which had to receive the waste after RCRA came in and wouldn't allow them to bury in the Superfund site anymore, it's the same waste. And we've asked EPA to test for PFAS in the Superfund site and the 3-mile-long offsite plume. And EPA said until there's an MCL, they cannot test it. They have to have the rule. They have to have the MCL under CERCLA in order to test. Our plea to you is that if we're going to stop these wastes from moving offsite as they are right now and possibly polluting our aquifers, we need to test the Superfund site to at least see if PFAS is there. And EPA is saying they refuse to test at all, just to confirm whether or not PFAS is there. If we knew PFAS was there, maybe we could start some treatment before it gets down into our aquifers. And we're asking the EPA to consider helping the communities. Lowry is upstream of thousands of wells. It's also got a water treatment plant at the Superfund site that is discharging what they say is not treated into the Metro Sewage District, which means that we've got this water which contains possible PFAS going to the Denver Zoo for irrigation, so on and so forth. And we're just asking EPA to consider being proactive instead of reactive in a case like this. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thanks. We are going to transition. So that is the last speaker that has signed up to speak. So now is going to be the chance for folks that would like to raise their hand and ask and provide comments. I want to just mention really quickly, though, because this was brought up a couple times about grants. Region 8 is hosting a grants webinar next Wednesday from 11 to 12. It's going to talk a lot about grants that are accessible through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So we are going to post a link to that webinar in the chat right now. And so you can sign up for that webinar as well. And we encourage you to do that. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Grace. She's going to give some instructions for those that would like to raise their hand to provide comments. Grace?
Thank you, Taylor. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we still have some time left, so we'll open it up to anyone new who would like to give feedback on any of these issues. Please click the raise hand button. You can find that in the bottom navigation in the reactions tab. Please keep your hand raised until you receive a message in Zoom and you have to click on that message, and that is what will allow us to give you speaking permission. So look for that message, and then once you click on it, You'll have to unmute once your name or your phone number is called. You can share your webcam video if you'd like. If you are joining via phone, callers should press *9 on the phone to share a comment. And then remember, you do have to unmute and begin speaking when you hear you will call out your area code. Okay, great. Let's see who we have on the line.
All right, we have Dr. Tom Kraus. Dr. Tom?
Yes.
Kraus? Okay.
Yes. Can I go ahead and speak?
Yes, please do.
Okay. I'm sorry, I had applied to speak earlier, but I guess it got lost. I'm Dr. Tom Kraus of the Lowry Landfill Superfund Site Community Advisory Group. There have been 2 major releases of toxic chemicals from the Lowry Landfill Superfund site. One is PFAS. Both have occurred for the same reason. Each release beyond the point of compliance has been an emerging contaminant that does not require containment. When the emergent contaminant is upgraded to a CERCLA hazardous substance or chemical of concern, it must be contained, but it can't be contained, but it's already been released for years into a longer and deeper plume. Furthermore, these releases are a violation of the Record of Decisions mandate to contain all toxic waste within the point of compliance. Both releases contaminated 2 of the 4 Front Range drinking water source aquifers. The first chemical is 1,4-dioxane. I talk about it because that's an example of what the problem is. It was released for 11 years before it became a chemical of concern. And the release created a toxic plume that extended 3 miles beyond the point of compliance. The second chemical release is PFAS, and the presence of PFAS is likely because the Superfund site has received 3 major sources of PFAS: post-1950 household waste, 138 million gallons of industrial waste, and biosolids. PFAS have been released for 29 years. This plume will be much longer than 3-mile 1,4-dioxane plume. In fact, PFAS contamination, as has been mentioned before, has been found above health advisory levels within Sand Creek, and that's only 1.5 miles downstream from the existing 1,4-dioxane plume. And the PFAS plume is going to be much larger. Emerging contaminants are the ongoing Achilles heel of containment. As of December 2022, the EPA has listed 10 additional emergent contaminants. The policy of containment will always fail. It's time to reopen the Record of Decision and seriously explore how to clean up the Lowry Landfill Superfund site. It has been 29 years since the Record of Decision decided on containment. Since then, many new groundwater remediation technologies have made the goal of cleanup feasible. Furthermore, the Lowry Landfill site needs to amend the last 5-year review from finding the site as protective to finding the site as protectiveness deferred. Why? Because the protective status was decided upon without screening for PFAS. They ignored the 2019 EPA groundwater screening level that was published to specifically allow sites to test for PFAS. Rocky Mountain Arsenal, Superfund site, and Buckley Air Force Base have both tested and found PFAS. Furthermore, the results of being told that the Lowry site is protective, that has resulted in local municipalities already considering residential and industrial development closer to the site and closer to the toxic plume. Please don't allow residents and industry to be exposed further to PFAS. Please don't wait 4 more years for the next 5-year review. Please don't wait for the ROD to reopen to change the protective status that was made based on incomplete information. Be protective, protect human health and environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kraus. We have Brian. Brian, I'm going to butcher your last name here, but I know it starts with an M.
Minch.
Minch. There you go, Brian.
Am I good to go? Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Brian Minch, president of Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment, one of the largest civic organizations of physicians in the Western United States. First, I wanted to make sure you're aware of a recent study of contamination of freshwater fish in the United States. The study found from 500 different fish caught from all 48 lower 48 states, significant contamination in the majority of all the samples, and only one fish out of 500 did not contain detectable amounts of PFAS. Fish from every one of the 48 states showed contamination. The researchers concluded that, quote, a single serving of freshwater fish per year with the median level of PFAS as detected by the US EPA monitoring program translates into a significant increase of PFOS levels in the bloodstream. Most of the PFAS measured was PFOS, one of the most toxic of this group. Because of its potency as a teratogen, carcinogen, and a reproductive toxin. Pollution researchers at the UK recently called PFAS the greatest chemical threat the human race has faced in the 21st century. Now, I also want to call your attention to a recent article in the Scientific American that stated nearly 70% of all pesticides introduced for commercial sale between 2015 and 2020 were found to be contaminated with PFAS, PFOS compounds. The article went on to say that PFOS was found in numerous pesticide concentrates at levels ranging from nearly 4 million to 20 million parts per trillion before dilutants were added. One of the former EPA scientists quoted in the article said, quote, if the intent was to spread these compounds across the entire globe, there would be few more effective methods than lacing pesticides with PFAS. So what we are asking the EPA to do is require that all entities that use high volumes of herbicides and insecticides be required to test for PFAS, PFOS contamination. When we broached this subject with the director of the Salt Lake City Mosquito Abatement District and asked him, what are you doing to make sure that there is not this contamination in the pesticides you're using? His comment was, he's taking the manufacturer's word for it. That is clearly unacceptable. These compounds used in high volume, virtually every kind of herbicide and insecticide needs to be tested for this kind of contamination before it's allowed to be used at high volume. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Minch. We have Richie Nordstrom.
Good evening, everyone. Richie Nordstrom from the city of Rapid City. I'm an alderman here in Rapid City, and we just had an experience that has been getting more public about our Air Force base here next door to us having PFAS contaminants go into the groundwater. Number one is just, if anybody can answer this question, have you been doing any testing here in the Rapid City area or Box Elder area? And then I'm interested in the migration of the plume that is known to be in the drinking water wells for the Box Elder residents. And then you raised an issue tonight that I know very little bit about, is the funding sources for doing some additional testing. You mentioned that there was looking at solid waste, and then also in our wastewater waste as well, the solid waste or biosolids that we have. And then also I am involved with our local LEPC, our Local Emergency Planning Committee. And I was just wondering if you'd seen or heard any information from our local folks here in Western South Dakota. Thank you.
Thanks, Richie. We're not here. We're not even here to answer any questions tonight, but we will definitely take that back to the team. So just want to flag that for you, and we appreciate all those comments. And I think we've got Joe Gallegos here. Joe.
Hi there, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm going to provide something quite different than everybody else has been speaking. I'm an environmental scientist, been cleaning up PFAS and investigating it, and visited several residences that had potential PFAS and helped them with their drinking water. I have a couple of things that I would like to just comment regarding my process of doing the cleanup. One of the things that has hand-tied us is disposal. I don't know if everybody online knows this, but there's no proper way to dispose, or there's no approved disposal way right now. There was, but like you mentioned during the presentation, that was almost 3 years ago. And so there's a stockpile of PFAS throughout the United States without a proper way to dispose of it. That was one of the things I would please urge the EPA to move on. I believe they're in negotiations with other federal agencies to come up with the acceptable disposal. My second one is the cleanup level versus the analytical limitation that the laboratories report. This makes it very difficult when we're trying to do a cleanup. And I love the enthusiasm that we want to clean up to zero on PFAS, but I believe there was a gentleman who spoke about, PFAS has been released into the environment since quite some time. And if we did that, to put a number on that cleanup would far below any type of budget we would ever imagine. So one of the things that I ask is of the EPA is take some practical reasoning when they're trying to decide on these numbers. Please, I believe the lady from Sierra Club was talking about speeding up the decision on some disposal, acceptable way. I know we were doing incineration, but there was a concern about air release from that. So, but that's all I gotta say is just help us out, the people who are actually doing the remediation of this. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, there was definitely a delay there. I think, Kurt, we see that your hand is up, but I'm not sure if you're still interested in speaking. We did send you an invite. So Kurt, if you are interested, and I think it's Kurt Hinneman, if you're interested, feel free to accept that invite. I think that is the last hand that we see. So just want to ask folks, we still got some time here tonight. So if folks want to, raise their hand and ask any questions, you can do that by using that raise hand feature, which is on the screen. And if you're on the phone, you can hit *9. Great. And Richie, I wanted to circle back. I know you had a lot of questions there. And while the next speaker was talking, I did coordinate with some other folks, and we've got your email address. So we're going to try to get back to you on some of those questions that are a little more specific to your community. So I appreciate you raising those. I think we've got another hand up right now. Caleb Owen. Looks like that. I think Caleb, your hand went down, so maybe you're not interested. If there's anyone else.
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, we can hear you, Caleb. There you are.
Hi, yes, Caleb Owen. I'm with the City of Thornton. We would just like to request the EPA speed up the release of the MCL for PFAS. We are sitting on a couple alternative engineering designs for treatment, and we can't move on them until we know what the EPA is requiring from the MCL. So just waiting on that. Secondly, excuse me, with the CERCLA designation, as a passive receiver of PFAS, we are requesting an exemption for drinking water utilities. We are not producing PFAS and excuse me. We would like that exemption. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, I don't think that we have any other hands up right now, so just want to pause again. And also, I've got a couple of messages that the link to the grants webinar that we're hosting next Wednesday from 10:30 to 11:30 Mountain Standard Time, that link was not working because there was a period at the end of it. So we're going to repost that into the chat and want to encourage folks to go to that grants webinar that we're going to be hosting next week, where we're going to talk a lot more about funding that's going to be available for a number of efforts, including to address PFAS. So hope you're able to make that. All right. I don't think that we have, okay, we do. I think Brian or Dr. Minch, I think you've got another comment.
Yeah, I do.
Great.
One of the two main cement kilns in the state of Utah is burning plastic waste shipped in from Boise, Idaho. So my question of the EPA is, what is the EPA prepared to or willing to do to test whether or not this cement kiln is putting out PFAS in their emissions from this cement kiln? That's going to be a huge issue, I think, in several other places, but we want to know what the EPA has planned for making sure that doesn't happen.
Thanks, Dr. Minch. That's helpful for us to hear. Are there any other questions from anyone else out there tonight? Again, or comments? You can ask those by raising your hand, using that raise hand feature, or pressing *9 if you're on the phone.
While we're waiting to see if anyone shows up, I just want to say thanks everyone for joining us, providing your comments, taking the time, caring about these issues.
Great.
Hi, this is Madhvi again. So
yes,
in the beginning of the seminar, you mentioned like that there is a different method to register like my comment for specific rules. So could you please explain how to do that, please?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so any proposed rule that EPA makes, it's going to be on the Federal Register. So that is a website. You can just Google Federal Register and you can go on there. You can search on the Federal Register for any rulemakings related to PFAS. And then also on the website where you registered for this listening session, there's also a link to a PFAS website that EPA maintains, and we post about rulemakings there. And those rulemakings will have a comment. We'll have a link to the Federal Register notice. So anytime EPA does any action, and not just EPA, I guess any federal agency does any action, we post that on the Federal Register for folks to make official comments related to each individual action that is happening. And Darcy, I'll pause there to see if you also want to speak broadly to the Federal Register.
Thanks, Taylor. And I would really just direct people to our website, the epa.gov/PFAS. And again, as you said, that as new proposed regulations come out or opportunities to comment, you'll be able to identify them there with links to get there pretty easily. So it's a great place, a great resource really for anyone who is interested.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so that again is the last raise hand that we see, but we still do have, a few more minutes here. So just want to pause and let folks have a minute to either raise their hand or to press *9 if you're on the phone. All right. I don't think that we're seeing anything. And so I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. But before I kind of wrap up and close, I want to turn it back to Darcy. She's going to summarize a couple of the key things that we've heard from folks tonight. So Darcy.
Thanks, Taylor. And thank you everyone for your comments. Really appreciate it. So first of all, I appreciate that we heard from speakers from Colorado, Montana, South Dakota, and Utah. And we had individuals sign up to join us tonight from each of our Region 8 states. So really pleased to see the response and so many people on this call tonight. I heard specific recommendations about EPA's ongoing actions to set drinking water standards and effluent guidelines, and really pushing us to take more ambitious actions and for additional transparency. I also heard a specific focus about reducing the manufacturing, use, and discharge of PFAS, really getting upstream of the problem rather than waiting for PFAS that are already in the environment. I heard some specific feedback about PFAS impacts on farmers and ranchers, concerns about PFAS chemicals at Superfund sites and military bases, concerns about PFAS in the food supply, fish, and in our pets. I heard specific recommendations about how we provide funding for small communities and tribes, and about how we can customize our funding and outreach to rural and tribal communities. I heard about the costs that PFAS may impose upon our water systems, our farmers, ranchers, and others, and the importance of identifying the sources of PFAS pollution and holding them accountable. And finally, I heard specific recommendations related to the actions EPA is taking and how we should work with our state partners and how we work with all of our other federal agencies. So those are some of the major themes. Taylor, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Darcy. I really appreciate that. So I just want to highlight, I know it's on the screen and we've mentioned it a couple times, but if you want to share any input after today's session, feel free to email that over to pfascouncil@epa.gov. Also, as I mentioned, there were a lot of comments, or at least a couple of comments about grants, and I know that's a huge part of this, not just grants for PFAS, but maybe grants for other issues that you're facing. And so I just want to highlight that EPA Region 8 is hosting a webinar next Wednesday to talk about grant funding, and that link has been put in the chat. So hopefully you can go there and register, and I encourage you to register, because not only are we going to send you the link to the grants webinar, but we're going to try to use that to also share updates about grants. So please go on there and fill that out. As we noted earlier, though, the feedback that you share with us, whether it was through your comments tonight or if you send it over in an email, it's not going to be considered as part of the formal comment process for any specific action that EPA is taking under the PFAS Strategic Roadmap. So you can comment on those specific actions, and we talked about a couple of ways, either through the Federal Register or through EPA's PFAS website. And so I would encourage you to take a look at that website. It's epa.gov/PFAS. And on that site, you're going to find links to each of the major actions that we're taking under the PFAS roadmap. And then where appropriate, there are going to be links to those formal comments under those actions. And secondly, we're not going to respond to each of the comments that we receive either through email, but we do want to synthesize what we've learned from not only tonight's session, but the other ones that we're hosting around the country. And then also, I just want to mention before we close that in addition to the regional listening sessions, EPA is going to be hosting a tribal listening session on April 6th, and that is going to be from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern time. And that is also on that website, epa.gov/PFAS. And so again, if you go to that next slide, I just want to thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and a special thanks to each of you who shared any of your feedback with us. Thanks to Region 8 Administrator Casey Becker, Deborah Nagel, and EPA's PFAS from EPA's PFAS Council, and Darcy O'Connor for joining us and speaking tonight. And I hope you all have a really great night. So thank you. Bye.